Well, hello, and thank you guys for tuning in to Capable of Change, a podcast and community based on recovery and life and healthy living, and of course, change, which is something we are in dire need of today. Like many others across the country, this weekend I participated in the Black Lives Matter protest. And unless you've been under a rock, you know that they were brought about by the senseless killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many more before them. The list is so long and it just keeps going on. And it's all over the news. And since I believe it's one of the most important issues that we as a people are facing today, I definitely think it's important to discuss it. For me, it's a touchy situation because I was raised in Goldsboro, which is about an hour east of Raleigh, and it is a small military town, and it is racist as hell. I went to it's almost completely segregated. When I went to school, the high schools were segregated. There was one black high school. It was called Goldsboro High School. The rest of the high schools were majority white. And when I'm talking about majority white, I'd say there was probably 3 to 5 black people in my grade. As a youth, an addict, I often bought drugs and interacted with the criminal side of the black community. And I can honestly say I haven't always felt the same way I do now about racism and equality. And it's because how I was raised. I just want to start by defining racism. In Merriam-Webster, it says that race is defined as discrimination, or racism is defined as discrimination or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior. When I was growing up, we just called that looking after your own. You got to look after your family and your people first, is what I was told. And I had black friends growing up. Actually my best friend growing up, her name was Akezia. Shout out Akezia. We are still really good friends on Facebook. But I think my parents were just trying to, give me a little bit of culture. But I definitely know that they looked at them as less than. It was never said. My grandpa would drop the N-bomb, but my mom, she didn't really like that. But I was sat down and told not to bring home black boyfriends. The whole thought of black friends was cool for my parents, but the whole thought of me breeding with a black guy or dating a black guy, that was a no-no. So I was raised with undertones of racism. I was raised in that, and when I was an addict, I spent a lot of time using it to my advantage. And I'm not proud of that. But this podcast is about change. And I've done a lot of changing in my own life to get to where I am today. And like I said, I definitely believe everybody's capable of change. I think people can change their mind. I think they can change their views and their ideas. And with that, I want to say that I protested, and I have been protesting because I believe in equality, and I believe that Black Lives Matter, and I believe that racism goes deep in our country and in our government, and even more so in the police. I have had many experiences with the police, especially the Raleigh Police Department, which is so racist. I have never met a more racist group of people, and I don't just say that from the outside looking in. I have spent time working with, and I have spent time with members of the Raleigh Raleigh Police Department on both sides, as an adversary and as somebody that was working with them, which I am also not proud of, but it is a part of the game. So, I have lots of in-depth knowledge about the wrongs that they do to Black people, poor people, brown people, just any criminals, just anybody that they want to ruin their lives. They make it their mission, right? It's their job. But look, I'm trying to keep this podcast under an hour for YouTube. So I'm going to have to separate these topics, and I'm just going to focus on the police. Racism is a topic that is in-depth enough to cover on its own, and we'll have to cover it another day. But today, I'm going to leave out facts and articles, and I'm just going to talk about my experience with the police. And you know that the police was started to catch runaway slaves. So to say that it's racist would be an understatement. Its very roots are in racism. And we all know as a people that the cops are racist. The majority of Americans agree with that fact, and apparently some of them are okay with it. Truth be told, in the criminal community, we routinely use that fact to our advantage. When we were boosting and we knew alarms might go off, we'd walk out with a Black family. For one, attendants are less likely to stop the white person when you walk out with the Black family. They stop the Black people. But also, when an alarm goes off, the Black person would usually just stop on their own. We'd keep walking because we know we had a purse full of stolen stuff, but they'd stop. They'd stop because they're used to being called out, and they knew that if they kept going, they were going to be accused. So they'd stop. They'd want to prove that they were not doing anything wrong. And that is just one example of how ingrained racism is in our society. When I was using, we'd routinely use fear to threaten and keep our dealers in check, our Black dealers. Because in my 15 years of using, I'd say the breakdown came down to, I dealt with some white dealers, but mostly those were just addicts. They were on the same level as I was. When I started moving up in the game and getting to know real dealers that ran things and had access to supply, large supply, they were usually Black people. And so I dealt with a lot of Black dealers, and I would routinely use things like fear, and we'd use racism to keep them in check. We would think that would help them from getting over on us. And it did. And in the game of cat and mouse played with cops and the drug community, it's intense. I cannot imagine how it would be if I weren't white. I'd probably be dead. I'd probably be dead. Just because by the time I went to prison, I had over 50 charges, and I was in prison with women of color who had a quarter of the charges I had and was doing 10 times the amount of time, because I would get away with so much because of my gender and my race. And then when I did get caught, police were more apt to look at me like their daughter or their sister, and they'd be more kind. They'd give me more chances. They'd give me more opportunity to explain myself. Then when I got in front of a judge, the same thing happened. I was able to afford lawyers. I was able to talk with the police and work with DAs, things that the black community just does not even have a chance to do. I mean, hell, they're killing black people out here before they even go to court, before they even get locked up. They're just killing them. So, I mean, for me, you know, I had so many opportunities when it came to dealing with the police. Black women were treated far worse in prison as well. I mean, in prison, they were just assumed to be inherently bad. And the crazy thing is that they were assumed, the majority of COs were black, and they treat their own kind worse. They were racist against their own people in there. And they just assumed that black people were bad and that they were up to no good. And they were black too. So it's some serious brainwashing going on. And as a white girl, I learned early how to use this privilege to my advantage in the drug game and in life. And in my 15 years of addiction, I've had many run-ins with the police. And let me just say that I believe we need police in our community. I'm not going to dog the police. There's a documentary that you can see on YouTube. It's called Seattle is Dying, and it discusses a massive liberal rollback of police power in Seattle. It discusses homelessness, catch and release, and basically it boils down to Seattle in the past couple of years has rolled back its policing on homelessness and addiction. What's happened is people get caught for using drugs, and if they have a small amount of drugs on them, they would once get locked up and then they would be released. So the police have just quit locking them up because there's no point. So now they have created tent cities downtown in Seattle, and business owners are constantly complaining that they can't have people come in their business because there are tents outside and there are needles, just people freely using in the tents in public. And the police has lost their power because of laws to do anything. And when they do something, no results happen. So, you know, the community is dealing with drug addiction on their front doorsteps at their businesses that they've been working with for 15 or 20 years trying to create, and they're losing everything because Seattle can't get a grip on its homelessness and its drug addicts. And so if you're interested in that type, it is a fascinating documentary, and I definitely, believe that you should watch it. There are a lot of people that have moved to Seattle a lot of addicts, because they are aware of the lax drug laws. And, here, if you're homeless, the town will pick you up and move you somewhere else, or they will lock you up. But there, they have no power to do that. So, addicts are going there in droves because they can just get high and they won't get locked up for it, which when I was an addict, man, if I didn't have the threat of the police, I couldn't imagine what a life like that would be like. So, as a person now that's clean, that owns a business, that cares about that kind of stuff, harm reduction, diseases, I definitely want the police to be able to, if I walk out of my business in the morning and there's a drug addict laying there's needles sitting out in a tent in front of my business and customers can't get into it, I don't want that. So, I definitely see the need for police, but of course not in their current capacity. I feel like police have too much on their plate. They have closed down, of course, mental institutions, especially in Raleigh with the close down of Dorothea Dix. There are so many mental cases in jails and prisons that police shouldn't have to deal with. That should be jobs of social workers. So in their current capacity, I feel like the police are dealing with too much. And these protests, they have shocked people that normally don't have any run-ins with the police. But now they're able to see what happens when one tries to go up against the police, right or wrong. It's on TV what the police are doing to people. These people, they have a right to assemble. They have a right to peacefully protest under the Constitution. But people can see that the cops don't care. They're tear gassing them. They're hitting them with sticks. And there are many cops who are just, quote, doing their jobs, right? They're just following orders. But, on a deeper level, who wants a job where you have to hurt people? Who signs up for that? And who signs up for it for $35,000 a year? Like, who does that? It's cops, right? And in my opinion, the job only really attracts assholes, right? There's those some people who their dad was a cop, their grandpa was a cop, and they're going to be a cop. But most of the time, cops are people that were bullied and picked on in school and looking to get even, right? There's some of them that want to help when they start. They think the best way to help people is by being a cop. But those people don't last. If they do, they end up being a school cop, or they end up working in HR or behind a desk, or, they end up being a beat cop in a small town for 20 years. They never get to be if you're a Raleigh police officer right now, if you're a Raleigh police officer that's been a Raleigh police officer for more than 2 years, and you've had your eyes open to the amount of racism and the amount of bad stuff they're doing and getting away with, I don't even know what to say. I couldn't do it. I know my mom, she went to work to be a social worker. She went to school to be a social worker and ended up working at a prison. She worked at a prison for a year, and she came home and she said, look, I can't do this anymore. I go in there every day. I try to help these people. Nothing becomes of it. I cannot help them. My hands are tied. And then she left and went and worked at a daycare. And that's what happens to people. It takes your soul. Unless you're in it for another reason, right? Unless you're in it for power, or you're an adrenaline junkie, or you actually enjoy arresting people and taking away their freedoms. That's these people, they're just on a power trip, do you know that cops have the same amount of training as the girl who cuts your hair? It's 2 years. In cosmetology school, which is what I did before I went back to school to work as a social worker. In cosmetology school, we shared a building with the Blett kids, and that is basic law enforcement training. And those guys were dicks even then. Like, even before the training, they were dicks. If you give them a gun and some power, and now they have the authority to basically do what they want, you can only imagine. It creates a monster, right? So 2 years is the training that they get. And after 2 years, they're able to carry a gun. You know, after 2 years, we were only able to carry some scissors. Like, it's just ridiculous. For me, I've always tried to understand cops at their basic level. When confronted by an officer, I always try to remember a couple things. I try to remember that they are people too, that they have their own motivations. Men are still men. I'm still a woman. So just because they're wearing a badge don't mean they're not attracted to me, right? It doesn't mean that they're going to be by the book either. In fact, in my experience, cops love to break the rules. They're, like I said, they're usually adrenaline junkies, hopped up on their own power. So if you can appeal to them on that level, they will work with you. One day, we'll discuss my time working for the cops. You know, people call that a snitch, right? Or CI, confidential informant. I am not proud to say that I've worked with the cops. It is something that people do. If somebody tells you that they wouldn't work for the cops, they're lying. Not everybody is given an opportunity to work for the police. That's a whole nother privilege thing, right? Because if you're given an opportunity, if somebody says you're facing 10 years, but if you help me set up 3 people, I will let you out of those 10 years and you can walk free. There's not really many people that would say that, okay, I'm going to go do my time. I'm going to go do my 10 years. Some people do say that because in the community there is such a hatred of working with the police, but 9 times out of 10, those people don't get the opportunity to work for the police. It is people of privilege that do. But I don't want to talk about that right now. That deserves a whole nother podcast. I just know that what I do want to say is that when I was working with them, I personally felt untouchable. And so, you know, there was times that you have what's called a handler, right? It's a person that you work with and you report to that person. And if you have to go out, they expect you to set up people, right? You're going to set up X amount of people to get out of your charges. You have to have so many felony busts, right? So if I would get pulled over, I would just say, yes, I'm out doing research for, you know, cop so-and-so. I'm working with him. They would give that cop a call. That call would say, yes, indeed, she is my CI, and they would let me go. Sometimes they'd make me throw away my needles. Sometimes, I mean, they never made me throw away my drugs. Sometimes they'd make you throw away needles, but like 9 times out of 10, they just let you go. Like, so I know that, you know, I worked with them for about a year. My contract was up after about a year. And in that time, I had begun to, I guess I had become to get a little reckless, right? Because I felt untouchable. So I can't imagine how they actually feel. If they had the power to let me run amok and do what I wanted to do, imagine how they'd feel when, you know, you're their friend or your brother or your dad's a cop or whatever. Like, I know people that are in cop families and they get out of stuff all the time. They get special treatment all the time. And they let me get away with all kinds of shit. And I would routinely break the law. You know, one time they came to pick me up. They brought me a car, and I had pretty much about a pint. I was drinking at that time. Not only was I doing heroin, but I was drinking about a pint of alcohol a day. I drink 100 proof Smirnoff when I had money, and I drink 80 proof Aristocrat when I didn't. So, I mean, I was taking shots with orange juice, like straight up. So I stayed drunk, I stayed drunk, but they would come pick me up late at night. They'd text me and say, hey, I need you to come do something for me. It's late. I'm going to swing by the house. We're going to bring you a car or whatever. And they'd say, okay. And I would tell them, I'm like, hey man, I've been drinking, like, whatever. I'm drunk. Like I'm above the limit. And they'd say, that's okay. Nobody's going to arrest you. We're the cops. They'd give me keys to a vehicle that they had from the impound lot. One time I had this Honda that they were letting me use. It had no radio, no heating system in it, nothing. They had ripped out the entire dash because it was an impound car. They were letting me drive it and use it while I was so drunk at 3 o'clock in the morning. They cared nothing about it. This is the Raleigh Police Department we're talking about now. Another time, my handler, his name was Detective Vogel. I'm not scared of putting it out there now. I worked with him, and I could tell he always had a thing for me, but I was in a committed relationship. I had been with somebody for 15 years, but I could tell that Detective Vogel was one of these types of people that would blur the lines, right? So nothing ever happened between him and I. I did my time and whatever. And then a couple of years later, when I went to prison, because that's what happens when you work with the police, inevitably they get what they want out of you. They use you up. And then when they run out of things, they find out all about your life. And then later on, they come back and bust you again. Just because you're working with them for right now during your contract, everything's cool. But then when they run out of people to bust, you're on their radar and they come back and get you. So I was working for this guy, Detective Vogel. He was at the Raleigh Police Department at that time. And, I got my charges overturned by the DA. I set up my number of people or whatever, and life went on. And then later on, I got busted again. And once you've worked with them one time, it's like your get out of jail free card. They don't want to give you that opportunity again. You've just kind of blown it. So when I got arrested, I talked to my arresting officer, who was really cool. On the way to prison, he actually let me throw my drugs out of the window. That's another thing I'm saying. Like, you can talk to these people. They have tremendous amount of power. So you should do well to remember that when you're dealing with the police. But he told me that, I asked him, I was like, whatever happened to Vogel? I said, like, I was working for Vogel. Can I talk to him? And he was like, no, he's not here anymore. He's been transferred. And then later I found out that he had been transferred because he had slept with a CI. Yes, he had slept with a CI. And what happened? Did he get fired? No, he got transferred. And, after I did my prison time, when I was getting clean, I would play Words with Friends on my app. And strangely enough, I came across him on the Words with Friends app. And we started up a conversation, and we would talk and play Scrabble. And I found out a lot about him. He had been transferred to, I don't know, some hick town or whatever. like in Connecticut or something. That's what happens to these people. They don't get fired because they are working under the guise of the police force. They can't be held accountable. They are all in unions. They're protected by unions, and they may get fired from their police, but mostly from their police station, from their town, but mostly they just get transferred. And that's what had happened to him, so it is something that happens. And if you're using, there is a major possibility that you will run into the police often. That game of cat and mouse is always right up front in your thoughts. These cops, they are just basically like one-man justice centers. If you get a decent one that can be reasoned with, that's great. And you should take that advantage. You should use that to your advantage. But you should also remember that they can kill you, just like they did George Floyd. They have the power to kill you. And in this case, the people, I'm not going to say the people saw that justice was served, because it's not. The only justice that can arise in this situation for George Floyd would be to have his life back. That is the only amount of justice. That's it. So justice will not be served in this situation, even if that cop goes to prison for the rest of his life. But the situation could very well be that you could also have a chance encounter with an officer, and then you could die. Like, supposedly he had a counterfeit check, and the police came to check out that situation, and then the next thing you know, he was dead. Oh my gosh, y'all, my dog is in here. I have a pug, and he is loud. So hold on one second. Let me get him out. He is squeezed in the door. Get, come on. All right, sorry about that. That's just life, right? It's life. But I just want to say that all of this is, there's so many reasons that you should work on getting clean, right? If you're listening to this podcast, are you working on getting clean? You've thought about it, right? So this is another reason why you should take getting clean serious. The life expectancy of people who have run-ins with the police is quite low, and it's getting lower and lower every day. They can take away your life by putting you in jail. They can also take away your life, as you see here, by killing you. They can just kill you. And since I've been clean, my run-ins with the police have dramatically decreased, which is a good thing, right? But they haven't all ended, because, like I said, the police are poorly trained, and once they find someone who can do their work for them, they often return. Like in my case, they have issued no-knock warrants on my house multiple times with no charges filed. That's in my career as a drug addict. But even after I got clean and was trying to start my life over and was on the path to recovery and was doing everything I could to succeed, they still tried to get me caught up. I have a felony on my record. I am well known. I even moved to another city, but that stuff follows you everywhere. So you need to know how to deal with the police. Even if you're in a situation where you don't think you do. I'm going to save that story for another time because that is a serious story, how they just come up in your house and don't find anything, knock your door down, and then just walk away. I mean, for me, they wanted me to work for them, right? Once they know that you will work for them and that you do a good job at it, probably better than they do, they want that. So all these things you should keep in mind if you're ever given that option to work for them. In my opinion, the police need better training. That's where, if you want to solve this problem, it takes 4 years to be a social worker. I'm currently in school right now to get my degree in social work. After I finish my degree in social work, I will be working on my master's in social work. Why? Because you can't get a good job without your master's. You can get a crappy job, but you can't get a good job. And it's recommended just to continue on with getting your master's. So that's going to be 5 minimum years, 5 to 7 years to work on a degree to be a social worker. And the police can get their degree. It's not even a degree, it's a tech degree. It's a certificate, right? Basically, it boils down to a certificate. They get it in 2 years. So 2 years, they can carry a gun. And in 2 years, after 2 years of training, they can end a person's life in the blink of an eye. They have that power. So, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. It's best to stay as far away from those guys as possible. But if you do encounter them, you need to remember some things. They are just like your high school bully or your middle school bully, right? They want respect. They want to believe they are helping something, they are accomplishing something in their job. And you better remember that they have the power to end your life, whether by locking you up or by killing you. My best advice when dealing with the cops is to be polite to them. Try to reason with them. They also have the power to let you go. They have that power. They can do that. They have let me go many, many times. So they have that power. And another thing that you do well to keep in mind is that they aren't that smart. If they were, they wouldn't be beat cops. They wouldn't even be detectives. Even the detectives aren't even that smart. I think you have to be a cop for 4 or 5 years, a beat cop for 4 or 5 years before you can be a detective. But they're just not that smart to begin with. I've personally lied so many times to cops, and they believe me. If you're a good liar, as long as you don't get your lies mixed up for a short period, you can lie to them. But you definitely need to act like you respect them. It is, as you can see, after countless news agencies has reported that, the cops have had their orders to stand down and hold the line, but then somebody in the crowd throws a bottle of water at them and they just freak out because they just cannot control themselves. These, like I said, are the middle school bullies. They can be provoked. They're easily provoked. They have little training. Most importantly, though, you just try to stay out of their orbit. Keep your tags up to date in your car. Keep your drugs at home. When you're buying drugs, don't use them in a parking lot. Take them home. I had so many rules when I was using, and that was one, right? Of course, you're so sick, you want to get high right then, but it is not worth it. Take your drugs home. Take them in the bathroom of the McDonald's and use them. Don't get high in your car. Don't take unnecessary risk. and work on changing your life and doing everything you can to be safe and grow as a person. Once you can take care of yourself, then you can stand up for others. But you have to be able to take care of yourself first. The problem of racism in the police force is not something I could or have wanted to help with when I was using. I can only take care of myself. Not only were the corrupt institutions beneficial to me when I was using, but the only person I could look out for me at that time was me. And I was doing a piss poor job at that. So it was only after I helped myself that I was able to help others. If you want to help this world, you have to help yourself. If you want to heal this world, you have to heal yourself. I had to change myself before I could work on changing the world. And so do you. And I know that we are all capable of change. I believe that we are all capable of change, even the police. We just have to realize what the problem is and that there is a problem, right? I believe we have finally started to do that. We have realized that there's a problem. The problem is racism in the police force. The problem is not having adequate training in the police force. There are some things that we need to change. And I believe we've finally started working on that as a community. So stay strong, keep working on changing yourself, keep advocating for change in your community, and keep searching for more opportunities to change. And until next time, please be safe out there.